Welcome, and in this lesson, we're going to cover the objective to learn how to boot, reboot, and shut down a system normally. Now, when we turn on a system, that's pretty relatively straightforward of booting into a system. But what we need to do is we need to take a look at the commands and really kind of an overview of how the system boots. So the first thing that we need to understand, and really, I honestly believe that the objectives here as are listed are a little bit out of order. So we're going to give you some background on some items, but we're going to cover it more in depth a little bit later on. So what we need to understand is that new Red Hat 7 enterprise systems, which associates over to Fedora, newer Fedora systems, newer CentOS systems, they're using an initialization manager called systemd. Systemd is really the backbone of the distribution now. What it does is it handles the initialization of our services. It fires up any type of what's called a unit configuration file. It really handles the shutting down and starting and everything of our system. If we reboot, it uses systemd. Now what happens is for backwards compatibility, the reboot command, the shutdown command, the halt command, and init commands are still available on our system. But systemd has really replaced the concept of run levels. So within it, that's how we navigate in and out of different run levels on a system. So if we were to type init 0 and hit enter, that would actually shut down the system. So that's run level 0 or no run level. Whereas init 6 would restart our system. And that's the concept of moving back and forth in and out of different run levels. The thing about it now is, even though it's there for backwards compatibility, it's really kind of a deprecated way of doing it. So systemd is really going to take over on most of that as we go forward. So I'm going to go over with you a few commands, and you'll have an exercise at the end of this lesson where you're going to use your linuxacademy.com lab servers to perform these tasks. Now feel free to perform while we're in the lesson, but I'm not going to because it's going to take a while to shut down and reboot back and forth. So first, if I wanted to reboot my system, my favorite way of doing that is just issuing the reboot command. You can just hit reboot and it will instantly reboot your system. So we know what a reboot is, hopefully at this point in our training, because we've gone through Linux Essentials. You've probably been in front of a computer for many years at this point, but a reboot shuts down the operating system, goes through the grub initialization process, does the init ram fs, does all of that stuff to load our system, restarts all of our services, and then hands everything off to systemd for even more starting. So how do we reboot with systemd? Well, we have the reboot command for regular reboot, but essentially what that's doing is that's calling systemctl reboot, calling that command. So I can also reboot by calling systemctl. Next, we have the well-known shutdown command. Now, the shutdown command is very popular because we have different flags that are associated with it. -R means reboot. -P means power off. And what we can do with this is we can set time. So I want to reboot the system. I can say shutdown -R, but I want to shut it down in 5 minutes. Well, let's say we're in a multi-user environment where there's multiple users logged in to the terminal on this system. I'm going to want to notify them that a reboot is coming so they can complete what they're doing. So what's happening here is I'm issuing the shutdown -R, which represents reboot, and then +5, which represents the number of minutes to wait before reboot. From here, I can issue a command. I can say system going down for a reboot. And if you notice, it does the wall command. It uses wall to send the message saying system going down for a reboot. And it shows it's going to be scheduled at 11:44:06, which if we take a look at our time, I'll hit Control-C, it's currently 11:39:21. So that's 5 minutes from now, reboot's going to happen. Well, I've changed my mind. I no longer need a reboot. How can I cancel the reboot? Well, I can just issue the shutdown-C flag. And that's going to cancel our reboot, and it's going to issue that saying the shutdown has been canceled. So it's not going to reboot any longer. Now I can specify an hour that I want it to also shut down or reboot. If I'm a system administrator and I know my system needs a reboot at 12 o'clock tonight, but I don't want to be awake at 12 o'clock tonight. It's not a production system. It's nothing I need to worry about. I can just do shutdown-R, and that's a reboot again, and I can schedule it for midnight tonight. And that's going to schedule the reboot for basically 12 a.m. Now, of course, I can cancel this by saying shutdown-C. So we're no longer going to issue that shutdown. But I can use an hour and time, the hour hand, usually in military time or 24-hour time, to define the time, 1:01 a.m., 12 a.m., like we just defined. If I wanted to shut down immediately or reboot immediately, I could do a shutdown-R now. And that says go ahead and shut down, which means reboot because we passed it the reboot flag now, immediately. That would be the same as giving it a +0. So that means immediately. We're going to do the reboot now. So that's how we would reboot a system. Now, rebooting the system obviously repowers on the system, goes through the initialization process, and boots you back into your terminal or whatever your target is, which we'll learn about targets here in a few lessons. So how do I power off a system? I want to just turn it off. I want it to be powered off. I don't want it to reboot. So I can use the systemctl halt command. This is going to stop our system. It's going to put it in a stop state. I can also issue the halt command. It's also going to do the same thing. I can also issue shutdown-h, and then we can schedule it. We can do it now, or we could do it in +5 minutes. System will be shut down in 5 minutes. Now, if you notice here, the flexible command, the one that we should probably be in the habit of using, is actually the shutdown command. If I was going to focus on learning something for the exam, I would make sure that I knew what the shutdown command would do. And of course, we always have the man pages. We know that the shutdown command is there. We could go through, look at the different options or flags that are available with it. And if you notice that on the bottom of our man pages, we also see different items that are associated with our shutdown command. And of course, systemctl is associated with it, or systemd, because systemctl is how it's really using or doing it now. The command is there for backwards compatibility, but it's really calling systemd in order for it to work. So we can use systemctl halt to also halt the system. So I'm going to go ahead and shutdown-c to cancel my reboot. It keeps warning me. It looks like it's going to warn me every minute for that reboot. That's a great feature. I really like that one. Now, this might seem a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with systemd, but really what's happening when our system is going into or shutting down or powering off, it's being changed into what's called a target. Now, this again replaces the concept of run levels. If I were to do an init 0, we would go into run level 0, which means shut down. And at 6 would go into the run level that would reboot our system. But with systemd, we've deprecated the use of run levels. Now, instead, we have something called targets. Now, these targets is what our system navigates in and out of in order to shut down a system, right? So when we do a reboot, we're actually navigating into, I think it's the reboot target. Now, I can look at available targets. I know they're available in the USR lib directory, then inside of systemd, and then inside of our system. Now, we have different targets and unit configuration files available to us. If we go in our system here, we see all of the different ones that are by default on our system. But what we're going to do is we're going to learn more about targets later on as we go. To understand, our system is using these targets to move into run levels, or no longer run levels, but targets to perform actions such as shut down the system, go through the process, run the services that are needed to reboot the system. So I wanted you to understand what's happening in the background, but let's take a look at a few more commands that we have. So I can also use the shutdown-h now command, which will halt the system. We could do init 0, which will halt the system. Again, this one's deprecated. I want to show you and tell you about it because it's still available, and it's still a lot of people use it. And it's going to be around probably through Red Hat 7 until they completely deprecate the init system. Now, it is completely deprecated because it's taken over by systemd, but there's backwards compatibility, essentially, is what's occurring. Now, how do I physically power off a system? I can do a systemctl power off. I can issue the power off command, or again, we can go to shutdown-p. Again, the key theme here is shutdown command can do everything we need it to do. Reboot, halt, power off, and we can schedule it and we can cancel it. Because we have access to man pages in the exam, I just suggest you know the shutdown command. So that's going to conclude it for this lesson. So I'm just going to conclude this lesson by actually shutting down the system. So we're going to do a shutdown, and I do want to show you that this is an uppercase P. I showed you lowercase p before, but it is an uppercase P, shutdown uppercase P. Again, use the man pages. We have uppercase P or dash dash power off as the option. Now, if you notice here, halt is really the equivalent of powering off our machine, but these are different ways of doing it. So I just wanted to show you the different ways of doing it. So we'll do a shutdown, dash capital P. Now it's going to shut down our system. And if you head over to your linuxacademy.com lab servers, you'll notice here in just a minute, your status is going to go from running to stopped. So that concludes it for this lesson. Go ahead and complete this lesson and move on.